Love isn't a feeling. Love is a commitment. Love is a choice. Love is a behavior.
The truth is, a lot of men and women out there need this information.
What I think is because you have expectations that marriage somehow is going to change or make better or fix something that's not working. I think the biggest need for a woman is to feel safe with that man.
Welcome to Breaking the Algorithm podcast. We have a very special guest today, all the way from the US of A, Danielle Hage, relationship expert, podcaster, speaker, and pastor. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I've been very excited to chat with you. I've followed you online for a long time. And I think your perspective on relationships especially is a breath of fresh air. I really enjoy the content, so valuable and very to the point. And I've been so curious to just have a one-on-one with you and have a chat and share some of your insights, learnings, and I guess the experience that you've had in relationships with couples, etc.
Okay.
To all of our viewers. So again, thank you so much for joining.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. My privilege.
So let's get into it. And I'm very curious, you've worked with so many different couples, obviously helping them through their relationship. What sort of inspired you to go down the track of helping individuals in relationships? And maybe you could just give a little bit of an insight into your background.
Yeah. Well, I came from a divorced home and I knew that I never wanted that for my family. And I wasn't going to get married till later. I had the little recording in my head all growing up from my mom saying, make sure you always have something to fall back on. Like you don't want to be totally dependent on a man and you need to get your education. You need to have a good job. And that I was always thinking about that. And I thought I'm going to go to college. I'm going to have a career. I'm not going to get married till later. And then I met my husband to be at 18 years old. And he wanted to get married. He was going to be a pastor. He was studying to be a pastor, and he was 21. And he said, we're not going to be able to date for very long because, he wanted to be in the ministry. And, the Bible says no sex before marriage. And so he was very serious and very committed to that. And he said, but there was a lot of passion there. And I was like, I am way too young. I'm not going to do it. I even moved an hour away thinking he'll forget all about me, out of sight, out of mind. But he came and visited me every weekend and he wasn't going to let it go. And he was pretty persistent. And so eventually he convinced me to get married. I got married at 19, which was not my plan, but I did it. And we said, well, we won't have kids for at least 5 years. Well, 4 months after marriage, I got pregnant with my first. And so that didn't really go according to plan, but I think God had a different plan for us. And I knew because we were so young, I wanted to make sure we did everything right. I wanted to be the perfect parent. I wanted to have the perfect marriage. I wanted to learn everything I could and learn from my parents' mistakes and others' mistakes and make sure I did it right. And because I wanted to stay married and I wanted to be happily married. I didn't, I'm a happy person and I could not be married if it was horrible. I wouldn't be able to stay married. So I thought we're going to stay married and we're going to be happy. So I read everything I could get my hands on. I definitely am, including the Bible. And I had a lot of teachers, a lot of mentors all through my early married years. And I basically now am just sharing everything that I've learned. We're going on 45 years of marriage. And I'm just sharing everything that I learned from my mentors and different authors and books and, different things that I've been a part of. And because we've been in the ministry and pastored church for so long, we deal with people all the time, from teenagers all the way up to elderly people. And so it's given me a big, a broad viewpoint and perspective on people. And everything that I, talk about is stuff that I've had to apply and had to experience. Pretty much I've made every mistake. If you've been married any length of time, like us, you pretty much have gone through everything. And, but we've raised 3 great kids and we have 6 grandkids now and they're all 3 married and everything's is good. Everything's going good. So I was very passionate about family and marriage and I've always been that way. So that's that's what got me headed in this direction.
Wow, it's incredible. And I mean, hats off to you. Over 40 years of marriage is a huge achievement. Quite rare, which is sad, but quite rare these days for people to be committed for that period of time. So you're doing something right for sure. And I guess today we're going to get through all of the juicy details of what makes a marriage and relationship work, because the truth is a lot of men and women out there need this information. Me personally, I'm divorced and I've had a marriage breakdown, and we're still really good friends, but it didn't work out. So through my journey in life, I tend to figure out things the hard way, unfortunately. And it's good to see someone like you that's learnt through the process and maintained it. I'm curious with your relationship and the individuals that you work with. Would you define the relationship as a more traditional styled relationship, or how would you sort of define the relationship, I guess, that you have and the ones that you see work the most?
Well, our marriage is definitely more conventional, more traditional. I was a stay-at-home mom. I wanted to be there for my kids. I didn't want to farm them out to daycare, and I would do little jobs here and there. And I was in full-time ministry along with my husband. Didn't always get a paycheck until later years in ministry, but I taught Group X fitness. I was a personal trainer, and so I made money doing different things. But I wanted, for the most part, to be there for my kids, and we decided that before we went into marriage. And my husband was in agreement with that, and so it is very traditional. People will accuse me of being, straight out of the 1950s. First of all, I wasn't alive in the 1950s, but I do kind of, I think regardless of what decade you live in, respect and honor and care and connection is all it is never going to go out of style. That's just the truth. As the more secular our world gets, if you buy into Hollywood's idea of what love is and romance rather than God's idea, you're going to get off track. And I think because the media and social media and the movies and the romance novels and all that stuff that we are kind of raised up in, all the fairy tales, that we have certain expectations of what a relationship looks like. And then, I'll hear people even say that, we were doing great when we were dating and we even moved in together before marriage. And then we got married and everything went to hell. And what I think is because you have expectations that marriage somehow is going to change or make better or fix something that's not working. And there's no big magical thing in marriage. Things don't change, but our expectations change. Even going from being engaged to getting married, it's like, well, when we were engaged, everything was great. Now we're married. It's because you have different expectations. You thought marriage was this magical bubble fantasy that was going to make everything okay and fix that other person, the things that maybe weren't right in your relationship. And it's not. It's the day in and day out of dying to self, being selfless, and making it more about we than just me. And I think it takes people being educated and being mature to figure out what marriage is, what love really is. People think love is a feeling. And if I don't feel that euphoric state of being in love, then I've fallen out of love. And that is a big fat lie. Love isn't a feeling. Love is a commitment. Love is a choice. Love is a behavior. And, my husband and I, when we dated, when that euphoric infatuation chemistry part of our relationship started to fade after about 6 months of dating, because I did think I was falling in love, even though I tried to get away from him because I didn't want to get married young. When I told him one day, I said, I just don't think I am in love with you anymore. And he said, well, love isn't a feeling. It's a choice. I'd never heard that. And of course, I'm only 18, but my parents didn't teach me that. And I thought, no, that's not right. If I have to feel it if I'm going to be in this. And he'd say, no, you don't. Do you think 10 years after marriage, we're going to wake up every morning feeling totally in love? He said, no, it's a commitment. It's a behavior. It's a choice. And he was so right. But at that age, I'm 18, I said, well, I'm not ready to make that commitment. And you shouldn't make that commitment if you're not ready. But one thing led to another, and I decided that I was going to choose to love him for the next 50 years or however long we live. And I think once you make that decision and you stick to it, even when you're not feeling it, we do things all the time that we don't feel like doing. We sometimes we don't feel like getting up and exercising. We don't feel like it, but you do it because you know it's good for your health. We don't always feel like eating right. I'd rather eat a chocolate chip cookie than that apple. But we eat the apple because we know it's better for our health, right? We do things that we don't feel like doing. We can't be led by our feelings. Feelings make horrible leaders. We have to make choices that line up with our values and our commitments. And so I think too many people don't understand that. They don't understand what love really is and what it really looks like and what it looks like.
Yeah, totally, totally. I completely agree with that. It was an interesting point that you brought up before in regards to your story, where you said that you grew up with that mentality that you were going to be independent and you didn't want to get married and be self-sufficient, which are all, independence is a really important thing for everybody and a really positive thing. But I guess it can also, if you're really fixed on that being your full identity, it can make it hard to integrate into a truly loving and fulfilling relationship. How did you initially get over that mindset or integrate that into the relationship? And what was that catalyst for you?
It was hard because I worked from the time I was 16. I had my first job and I loved going to work. I moved out of my home into my own apartment at 17. And I loved that independence. I loved being out on my own. I bought my own car. I was putting myself through school and I thought it was cool. And I didn't move out because I had bad parents. I mean, I had a great mom, a good dad, but I just wanted to be on my own. And so when I got married, I was still working. He was working. And then I got pregnant and probably, maybe 6-7 months into my pregnancy, he said, you can stop working, and at that time I was waitressing. I was a waitress and I made really good money and I worked a lot of hours but it was starting to get hard, on my feet. Now you had my belly and he said, you can stop working. And I said, but I don't have my own money. I said, that's weird. And he said, my money is our money, and I said, yeah, but if am going to buy you a birthday present, you're going to give me your money for me to buy you a birthday present. That doesn't compute. I don't see how that works. And at first it was hard to just know that he's my provider and I'm not contributing. But then I realized that I contribute other things. I made our house a home, and then I started having babies and I was raising children. And he felt very proud that he could be the sole provider and I could be a stay-at-home mom. He felt that was what was best for our kids. And he felt very proud to be that man in my life. And that was just something that was a core value for both of us. We both agreed on that. I mean, I would say if as a young girl, if you want to be a stay-at-home mom, raise your kids, you need to marry a man that's on board with that. Not someone that is saying, no, you're going to work. We're going to have a 2-income household. And yes, people say, well, how can you even make it these days without 2 incomes? It was hard. I'm not kidding you. We didn't have a lot. It was hard. And we scrimped and saved our pennies to buy a home. And at one point I started cleaning houses. I was back then it was called aerobic instructor. But I did little things here and there to make ends meet, anything that I could contribute. But we didn't have a lot. And that's one of the sacrifices that we chose to make in order to raise a family. And that was okay with us, but if you want all the best of everything, the big house, the big cars, the big bank account, and you're not willing to sacrifice that stuff to raise a family, then don't have family because your kids need you. They need a parent, at least one, that's going to be there for them. And so we just worked it out according to what we thought was important and right for us. And that might not be right for everybody, but that was how it was right for us.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I'm sure that there's successful parties in both categories, whether you want a 2-income household or you want a traditional relationship. And I guess these days, correct me if I'm wrong, but it just feels like there's more of a negative view on a more traditional relationship. And there seems to be a lot of fear and distrust maybe from the female side of things, that they're able to relinquish some of that independence and trust a partner to provide. Would you say it's accurate that these days the view on traditional style relationships has probably changed a lot? And
Oh, yeah.
what do you think the catalyst to that is?
I think people don't respect the institution of marriage anymore. And marriage, I mean, marriage and family is the backbone of society. Look at our society. Look at what has happened in our world. Look at some of the kids, the teenagers. Look at the suicide rate amongst young kids. I mean, I just think that people don't respect marriage for what it is supposed to be. Doesn't mean that every moment of every day you're so completely happy and satisfied and fulfilled, with your partner. No, that's not real life. That's a Hallmark movie.